While some online bullion dealers continue to charge almost $2 over spot for 1 ounce silver rounds, SD Bullion is selling 1 ounce silver rounds at only 49 cents over spot on any quantity. Again, that's $9.99 fine silver for just 49 cents over spot for any quantity. If you haven't joined the over 40,000 precious metals investors by making the switch to SD Bullion, what are you waiting for? You could save hundreds or even thousands of dollars on your next order. SD Bullion, the lowest prices, period.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with SilverDoctors.com, and with us today is Jim Willie, editor of the Hat-Trick Letter, found on GoldenJackass.com. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure being on. I apologize for my voice. It's a little subpar, but I assure you that the brain and the energy level are doing quite well.
All right. Well, we had some viewers submit some questions today, so we'll get to those. But first, I'd like to address one of the main topics that you've been focusing on recently, which is the U.S.-German trade war. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to make a comment that the United States is now a fascist nation, and it's not well recognized. We occasionally hear the descriptive term of neocon. I believe neocons cut across Democrat and Republican lines to form approximately 75 to 80% of the Congress, and that's a very ugly percentage because the non-fascists are popularists. So it means that the fascists have about 3/4 control of our government. The fascists have a characteristic over history of killing their host, going to war with their enemies, and alienating and defrauding their allies. And the U.S. is no different. We're now engaging in an escalation of the Russian sanctions. I apologize. I'm going to be clearing my throat like every 30 seconds, and that is just the way it's going to be. I'm overcoming the worst illness in my life. We've had Russian sanctions in place applying to European companies for over 2 years. Now the United States, in its incredible stupidity and stubbornness and arrogance, has decided to target German companies working toward the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Germany and Russia. Not just the construction companies, but the finance companies. The Germans have tolerated U.S. interference in their commercial and business sector for over 2 years with some rather nice compliance and obedience and dropping to the knee to kiss the fascist ring in Washington. But this seems to have gone over the line. I've made a comment for 2 years running that the energy pipelines from Germany to Russia are off limits with respect to the sanctions. And that has been the case for quite some time. The Germans have reacted in the past 2 years by setting up subsidiaries inside Russia so that they wouldn't have to export to Russia. They'd simply ship it inside Russia domestically. The energy pipeline is now in focus. It's multiple pipelines, but the fascists in Washington have decided that they're going to impose sanctions on German companies involved with this Nord Stream 2. This is insane. This is without precedent. Imagine the Chinese telling the United States that they're going to face fines if they do business agriculturally with South America. Absolutely intolerable. Well, the Germans have responded by saying, You're out of bounds, out of line, and out of step. We will not honor these. We will not follow these rules. And furthermore, we're going to impose sanctions on U.S. companies if you continue toward this incredible line of stupidity. So we're working toward trade war between the United States and Germany right after an important session took place where Donald Trump, president, made a statement that France and Germany and the other European countries were going to have to make greater payments and contributions financially toward NATO war buildup, weapons purchases, etc. The Germans said, no way, we're not interested in that. Now you're starting to see a lot of German comments from high levels, like their, I think he's economics minister, Gabriel. Gabriel is making comments that they need to rethink, and so is Merkel, to rethink all their rules and regulations toward Russian commerce. We're moving toward a position where the Germans are going to either ignore the Washington rules or else oppose them and match them with their own onerous rules toward Washington. The result is that Germany is starting to flip east, exactly as I had forecast 3 years ago. I said after the Ukraine war and Russian sanctions that Germany would eventually flip east. It's starting to happen. The early signals are there. And furthermore, an incident took place with respect to the Turkish NATO base called Incirlik, where the Germans removed 250 of their military men, brought them back to Germany in response to some Turkish actions, where the Turks were upset that Germany gave safe harbor to some of the people involved in the failed Erdogan coup attempt led by the United States and NATO troops on Turkish soil. There's something else I'd like to say in addition to how the fascists kill their hosts and alienate their allies. Their foreign policy results in everything in failure. Every single foreign policy initiative resulting in a failure. Every single one a failure. Find a positive foreign policy initiative since 2001, when the fascist neocons took power and implemented their Patriot Act, otherwise known as the Fascist Manifesto. Okay, that's my little speech on Germany. If you have a follow-up, I'd be glad to try to answer it.
Definitely. So you were talking about how Germany is moving east. Did you want to expand on how you think this will impact the United States?
Isolation. The United States is the only G7 nation not a member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And it's the only nation that doesn't send proper delegations to the One Belt, One Road programs, conferences, and initiatives. We're moving toward isolation right now, and what's furthering it along is the complete set of non-dollar platforms, such as the AIIB that I mentioned, the BRICS Development Bank, the Chinese Interbank Payment System, CIPS, which is also known as the Cross-Border International Payment System, SCO. Well, the United States is not going to join SCO because We run NATO and have turned it from defense to offense and military aggression. We're surrounding Russia on every one of their borders because Russia is so aggressive. You know, the fascist neocons use words and descriptions that apply to themselves. The result of all this is greater isolation. At a time when the climate warming fraud and research scientists' fraud is being exposed, the pedophilia fraud is being exposed, the GMO food and chromosome alteration fraud is being exposed, the oil and gas fracking for contamination of the groundwater is being exposed, the laced vaccines is being exposed, and the United States is behind all of it. All of it. So we're going to face alienation and possible quarantine in future months and future years. The big event coming up real soon is that the Saudis start selling oil to the Chinese in RMB, and that'll be yet another nail in the petrodollar coffin. And as the petrodollar becomes more and more a disintegrated de facto standard, you're going to have more and more immediate need for a domestic-only dollar. The pressures are really mounting, Elijah, but the U.S., the consequence of all these different actions, in addition to war crimes, in every single war front that the United States is involved in, war crimes, civilian murder. For instance, the Saudis are using U.S. weapons to bomb hospitals and schools in Yemen. I mean, we're not facing UN sanctions and harsh attention because we control the UN. In fact, I heard something really nasty from The Voice about 5 or 6 months ago, that the Saudis paid a huge bribe to the United Nations high-level officials so they would not be called down for Yemen war crimes. So that, this is where we're going. The corruption is at all levels. All those different contamination and corruption elements, they're what I call the 7 bowls of the apocalypse. It's here. It's right now. It's in front of your face. All you biblical scholars who focus on the future, try focusing on the present. It's right in front of your nose. And I pointed out the result will be isolation, a domestic-only dollar, and possible quarantine. Quarantine means like U.S. citizens cannot travel abroad because they're from a pariah state. U.S. is going to be marked a rogue nation. All the things we do to the other nations, like calling Iran a rogue nation and sanctioning it, freezing their assets, these things are going to be done to the United States, and soon.
Moving on here to the viewers' questions. The first section of the viewers' questions have to do with currencies, and this one is from Scott. He asks, once the gold trade note has gained wide acceptance and the U.S. is forced to introduce and devalue the Scheich dollar and come up with a hard asset backing for its currency, would you agree that sharp reductions in U.S. consumption and severe shortages are a more likely outcome as compared to just continuing a large trade deficit and forfeiting large amounts of gold and other assets?
Yeah, let me give my forecast, or repeat it, a description of what is likely with the Scheich dollar. I expect it'll have a phony hard asset backing. And the United States government will be called on it by the Eastern nations as putting forth a fraudulent currency. By that I mean, I apologize. I'm really struggling with my voice. I'm feeling great. I'm actually doing a move of my apartment. I've got energy. I mean, my back's a little sore, but I got a lot of energy. The only thing lacking right now is my voice. I got some damage to my throat. But let me give you an example of what I think they might do to back the new dollar. They might say it's backed by oodles and oodles of oil and gas deposits in the United States. They'll say for sure that it's backed by the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They're going to bring up the bullshit, sorry. They're going to bring up the BS that it'll be backed by the Fort Knox 8,500, 8,700 tons of gold. That does not exist. They might say they're going to put up for some form of commitment gold in the Grand Canyon, in all the different placer deposits there. They're going to bring up as a backing the North Slope of Alaska. After this all happens, the dollar will supposedly be backed by hard assets, but one by one, the analysts out there in the world community are going to knock off the different legs for the backing for the dollar. And remember, a new dollar means it's going to trade independently on the Forex, which means it can be devalued. And I'm thinking it's going to be devalued a little bit at first, a little more later, and then brutally devalued. Brutally devalued. Okay, now the question was, are we going to get reductions in consumption and severe shortage more likely than large trade deficits? We're not going to get one or the other. We're going to get both. Since when do we get a choice? The devalued new dollar will lower the trade deficit, for sure, by lower consumption. But when you have a devaluation, it means everything is more expensive to import. So we're not going to reduce the trade deficit, we're going to increase it. While we have price inflation, while we have shortages. So while the households start to adjust by buying less, let's just, use some napkin math here for a minute. Let's say they drop 5% in demand, but the price is up 10%. That means an increase of 5% on the deficit. You don't get one or the other, you get both. Take a look at Venezuela. Are they reducing their trade deficit? No. Do they have shortages? Yeah. Are they getting worse? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so after the recognition that the Scheich dollar has a fraudulent backbone, you're going to see brutal devaluations, which means, for example, like a Toyota car, which might cost now $25,000, will cost $40,000. Now, do you think there would be 30% less demand? I don't think so. I think it's going to be like 10, 20% less demand. A nice BMW. Right now, it's like $50,000. It's going to go up to 80. It's going to bring up a lot of attention and scrutiny to how even in agriculture, we've got an import problem. I remember noticing 15 and 20 years ago that during the winter months, there was quite a bit of fruit and vegetable produce in supermarkets from South America, like chili, tomatoes from Chile. And they look a little different, but they're tasty. The U.S. I think it was last decade, went over the mark and finally was over 50% in food imports. Now, add all the California droughts, add all the fracking, which contaminates water, add in the 1.3 billion gallons of Halliburton contaminated water in the California water system that they called an accident, that had 0 fines from the Environmental Protection Agency. Add it all up, and I think what you get, Elijah, is less California fruit and vegetable output. So our import problem with food is getting worse. Probably importing 60% now. Okay, I think the Scheist dollar is going to be a major impetus toward pushing toward pushing the United States as a nation into a recognized condition of third world. What it will do, though, is make foreign investment much more attractive. Imagine a 30% decline in the US dollar and Chinese initiatives to build high-speed railroads, hire Americans, although they won't be able to hire many. Imagine the inducement for European countries to purchase, say, office buildings and relieve some of the pressure from China. China owns 30% of all the major urban commercial buildings in the United States. That is a dirty, dirty little secret that I guarantee you 90% of Americans don't know. Of course, many Americans believe the capital of Germany is France. Many people could not even begin to identify either Yemen or Djibouti on a map. They proved long ago they can't identify Vietnam on a map. So, the Scheist dollar is going to be a very, very big change agent. And I think the biggest trigger toward making it come to pass will be the Chinese buying oil in RMB currency, and the Chinese and other Eurasian Trade Zone members starting to use a newly constructed gold trade note. The pieces are coming together, Elijah.
Libby is wanting to know about, you've been talking about a dual currency happening in the future, where there's one kind of dollar inside the country and a completely different kind of dollar outside the country. She's wanting to know, have you heard of Doug Casey's prediction of the introduction of Fed coin, where it would be like a digital currency created by the Fed that would be something new and not just the digital dollars the Fed creates out of thin air?
Okay, I think there are two dual concepts. One is the dual dollar, but let me first introduce what I call the dual currency universe. I'll get to the question after this preface. Soon we're going to start to see a much more recognized global situation where the Eastern Hemisphere, it's like half the world, half our world on Earth, are going to use the RMB currency and the ruble, Russian currency. So the Russian and Chinese currencies are going to dominate for trade. And whatever dominates for trade will replace the treasury bond in their banking systems. Foreign countries have treasury bonds in their banking systems to facilitate their trade payments. If they're not done in treasury bills, the dollar, they're going to be dumping their treasury bonds. So the dual universe will be the East using RMB and ruble and later introducing the gold trade note, while the West, the Western Europe, England, North America, and a couple of slave vassal states like Japan, Korea, and Latin America, they're still under the howitzers shadow from Langley and the Pentagon. They're going to use the dollar. So the West is going to use the dollar, continue with trade payments and treasury bills, and continue to use the treasury bonds in their banking system. Okay. That dual universe is going to be much more recognized soon, but immediately when the Chinese announce the gold trade note, start the clock, because the dollar, which I like to call the king dollar, its reign of terror, start the clock for the death of the dollar, the vanishing of the dollar. Okay, now I'll move on to the dual concept of the dollar. When this new dollar is introduced, it's going to be a tremendous flashpoint. It means the U.S. is no longer in control of the dollar as the global currency reserve. That always means two big things. Not the standard for uniformly applied payments in trade. So the treasury bill is not going to be used everywhere for trade payments. And it's not just oil, and not just container vessels. It's not just, grain shipments. It's international contracts, consultants, etc. Okay. When that happens, the U.S. will be admitting that it no longer controls foreign-held dollars. By that I mean dollars that are not inside the United States. It's that simple. So dollars in Panama, dollars in Singapore, dollars in Hong Kong, dollars in Zurich, they're not going to be under the compliance rules for the fascists running the U.S. government. It means the FATCA rules will fall by the wayside. It means probably, this is my conjecture, which is a really nice word for educated guess. My conjecture is the IMF, led by China, will start in its control of rules and regulations for internationally held dollars outside the United States. Inside the United States is going to be forced conversion. Citizens inside the United States are going to have a very weird time with their foreign accounts and their dollars. It might be called home. If you think it's a small amount, you're nuts. It's like 20 trillion. U.S. citizens holding dollars outside the U.S. or owning companies that hold dollars outside the U.S. total 20 trillion. And there's going to be a big initiative to bring it home to alleviate the trade deficit by virtue of the current accounts deficit. Okay, more important than the trade deficit is the current account deficit. What's the total on goods and services plus the financial instruments? If someone buys from Germany or England, buys a big Miami hotel, that does not address the trade deficit. It addresses the current accounts deficit. So if Donald Trump can encourage a lot of the 20 trillion to come home every year, like 1 trillion a year, we alleviate the trade deficit impact. by making it a zero current account deficit impact. Okay, so when the dual dollar currency comes about, we're going to see new offices, new management. The new management, I think, is going to be largely China. China is taking control of the IMF. They're actually the only country making good on their pledges with actual payments toward the function of the IMF. We're going to be seeing a tremendous impact on global finance when the international dollar is no longer under U.S. control. The impact is going to be enormous inside the country due to the introduction and launch of the Scheisse dollar, for the reasons I stated before. Scrutiny of its false backing, and then its tremendous impact for a trade deficit. Let me just give you a quick equivalence napkin and more napkin math. If the U.S. has $550 billion in trade deficit and it's not alleviated, I'm sorry, I got a drink. And the $550 billion is not alleviated by current account deficit offset, namely like huge amounts of money coming into the United States repatriated. If the gold price is $1,300, that amounts to a forfeiture of 13,000 tons. Okay? So we're in very, very delicate position here. All right. As for Fed coin, I really don't trust anything the Fed would produce on digital currency. My guess is they would use that as leverage to do harm to other cryptocurrencies. But digital dollars might become a reality. It could be soon. I really don't know. I really don't know. I think it's unavoidable that we're going to see some U.S. government, Federal Reserve, gambit, an entry of cryptocurrencies so they're not left out in the cold. But I just don't know how it's going to play out. We're in extremely delicate ground here on everything. I think I think Wall Street banks are going to try to produce a cryptocurrency, and they're going to be scrutinized heavily. The process has already begun. Scrutinized for their validity, for their efficiency, and for their energy toward mined coin. There are going to be a lot of winners, and I just don't know how badly the losers are going to lose. But it seems to me that the whole armada of cryptocurrencies is giving a serious challenge to the entire Forex toilet paper based currency system. I cannot see how the dollar or the Forex currencies can survive this assault.
All right, and this next question has to do with cryptocurrencies, as you were just talking about. There was a flash crash recently in the Ethereum market, and they were wanting to know your perspective on that and whether you think it was the work of the Federal Reserve and big banks to destroy faith in it.
Well, it could be, but I don't really know. We never know the source of the flash crashes. It could be that Wall Street and London banks bought not a significant, but a notable amount of Ethereum coins in order to execute at the margin. And I don't really know that you could call it a crash. If it, did it drop over 30 or 35%? I don't think so. Did it recover quickly? Yeah. Is it higher now? Yeah. In other words, so what? But we're going to see like Trojan horse cryptocurrencies. For example, the one that Blythe Masters at JP Morgan was talking about. She could make her entry, and I guarantee you there'll be some very serious flaws and holes in it. And it might do well initially while the dummies in the room are buying it instead of buying their Apple or Google stock. But the shakeout is going to come, and there are going to be a number of analysts coming out. I mean, I'm no expert, but I'm starting to understand the scrutinized criteria for what makes a good cryptocurrency. And it's efficiency, low energy for production, and they pretty much all have really solid encryption. So that's not going to distinguish them. But you never know if Wall Street comes out with a poorly constructed encryption so that they can steal from their victims who buy it. It's going to be really doubly interesting, though, if and when the Chinese introduce the gold trade note and use the blockchain technology in its construction. In other words, the gold trade note will be like a sophisticated, marketable instrument, like a granddaddy of all the bitcoins, a granddaddy of all the cryptocurrencies will be the gold trade note. Wouldn't that be interesting?
All right, now moving on here to the section on gold and silver. This viewer question is from Mikey. Trader and whistleblower Andrew McGuire said something big was going to occur in the gold market in about 26 days. And this question was written a couple days ago. Have your sources expressed something similar?
My sources are pretty much antagonists of the paper market. For instance, London Paul made a comment regarding the McGuire upcoming event. He said, until the COMEX is shut down doesn't mean a thing. That's pretty much my comment. Andrew McGuire is a good guy, and he's an honest guy. And he was almost killed about 3 years ago on a hit and run incident by an unmarked black car, SUV, which is typical for the US and British government people. But okay, let me avoid the antagonist kind of remark. McGuire is stating that a sovereign or a group of sovereigns, by that I mean national officials and their representatives, including the Gulf monarchies. He's saying that they are standing for delivery. He's saying that they're not going to put up with the usual games of forcing cash settlement. He's saying that what is being now put forth standing for delivery, where they file documents and say they've got their gold contracts and they want the gold, and they're going to come up with the additional cash beyond the somewhat small portion for margin, the rest of the cash, they're coming up to the table and saying, our trucks are ready, we want to pick up the gold. He's saying that the sovereigns will not take the cash settlement. He's saying that the volume is much bigger than ever before. Okay, well, look back to what happened with May, June. The COMEX came out with a statement in written form to their various participants with the paper contracts and said, we have an urgent situation and we request your cooperation more than ever before to accept cash settlement. And a lot did. Something like 65% came forward and said, okay, we'll honor your wish, we'll comply with your urgent condition and new situation. Okay, I'm not so sure it's going to happen that clean right now. I just don't know it's going to be so clean. I just think we're going to see some defiance like not before. Whether it results in tremendous gold delivery or admission that they cannot, which is an admission of default, I don't know. I don't know. But I have a very firm opinion that the breakdown will not come within the paper arenas. The breakdown will come outside the Western control, like with trade payments no longer done in the dollar and massive dumping of the treasury bonds by Eastern nations. I don't think we're going to get a colossal event in the COMEX market where they admit a gold default. They'll borrow more Vatican gold. They'll steal more Arab gold. They'll force more cash settlement. They'll threaten to kill the daughters of the contract holders. They'll threaten to ban the contract holders from future COMEX entry into the building, and they'll buy another month. Okay, so when they say it's different this time, I doubt it. I can't see that it's going to be a great deal different. Anyway, let's move on to more questions within gold and silver.
Definitely, and this viewer wants to know about one of the ways that, precious metal prices can be distorted. A lot of people have talked about how the paper gold and silver really trade multiple times the underlying physical. They're wanting to know how many paper ounces trade for every physical ounce.
It's in the 400 to 450 to 1 range. And for silver, it's in the 70 to 90 to 1 range. There's a historical breakpoint that Euroraj has brought to my attention when the gold-silver ratio is above 75 and near 80 or above, usually it's a good warning signal of an imminent financial crisis. And we're there now. Let's get to that Hong Kong question. I'm anxious to get to that.
Definitely. And so this question is from a viewer wanting to know, is there any significance to a new physical gold contract coming out of Hong Kong called Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited? Will it be able to do what the Shanghai Exchange has failed to do?
Possibly yes, but don't give too much criticism to the Shanghai group, because they're doing great work. They've got a gold delivery contract that's written in RMB terms, Chinese currency. So they've been draining a considerable amount of gold at a time when the Chinese government just made a statement about 3 weeks ago. It brought a little laughter and a little admiration from me, and more from my jackass colleagues. But the Chinese announced that they were shutting down some of their gold mine production, domestic production, because they were marginal mines and because their costs were maybe close to or higher than the suppressed gold price. The Voice doubted the veracity of the statement and said they were probably continuing 24/7, and most likely were putting it all in inventory for the purpose of forcing more imports, which is exactly what happened last month. Okay, so the Shanghai group has been quite successful, but what they've been lacking, in my opinion, is another Chinese man's leg to stand outside China, to conduct business. And here's where Hong Kong is unique and powerful. Hong Kong is not inside China. Hong Kong is operating as a regional independent state, subject to Chinese rules, subject to Chinese overview, and they're going to be cooperating with Shanghai in a much bigger way. Hong Kong is going to have an RMB gold contract with delivery and a dollar contract for gold with delivery. Now you combine that with Shanghai, and you're going to, I don't really care about arbitrage. I don't care that there's a $20 difference and, buy cheap New York, sell it expensive in Hong Kong or Shanghai. I don't care about arbitrage. I really don't. What I care about is draining the gold inventory, forcing a COMEX event. They're not going to force a default event in COMEX. They're going to force something very bizarre. They're going to force like a suspension of gold delivery. They're going to force a credit of future gold delivery. They're going to force an alternative location for delivery in Rome. That's what I look forward to. Bizarre situation where people conclude the COMEX must be dead, but they're not defaulting. And then the Eastern nations say, we want to eliminate the treasury bill and trade payment. And then the effect goes to the banks. So the Hong Kong situation is perfect because they've extended the trading hours to include the New York gold fix. So they're going to be putting some hot pokers up the New York rectums. I don't think of this as a Shanghai failure. I think of this as Shanghai progress that solicited reinforcement from across the line, across the fence in Hong Kong. It's going to be quite interesting to watch Hong Kong. Hong Kong, by the way, is the recipient of rather massive U.S. gold exports in a rather strange category called manufacturing supplies. where they try to sneak in gold dust and things like that. And what I've been told, this is a strong suspicion by the voice, but not a certainty. He said Hong Kong for several years has been receiving gold exports under the manufacturing category to compensate for phony, false, salted gold bars by the thousands from the Clinton administration, from the US to Hong Kong, using the same trade routes as the US heroin and cocaine through Panama. Very, very ugly and interesting.
All right, well, moving to the last viewer's question on precious metals. They're wanting to know, is there anything worth investing in your mind, besides precious metals and maybe cryptocurrencies?
Artworks, but not a lot, because I think that due to some cash pressures, we're very likely to see a breakdown, not a collapse, but a breakdown to some degree in artworks. I would not invest at all in old cars, antique cars. Some antique furniture, yeah. I'd be very careful of farmland at this point. Farmland has had a good run. I got one client who talks to me about Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois farmland acreage prices. There's not only a risk of a bubble in farmland prices, there's a risk of admitted and discovered contamination of the water table. You got some rich farmland and suddenly you discover that your water catches fire. You might not be able to grow crops and you might not be able to sell it. But I much prefer precious metals to cryptocurrencies. To be sure, the cryptos are going to continue their march with bumps, with more scrutiny. By that I mean some will be pushed to the wayside as faulty or weak, but maybe not so fraudulent. The Wall Street entries will be called fraudulent because they will be very fraudulent once they're scrutinized. Big words and scrutiny when it comes to these cryptocurrencies. By the way, I'm executing a move right now so that all interviews in the future will have no traffic noise in the background. I much prefer the precious metals because they're worth twice as much as the official price. I don't really give a rat's hind end about comments like I get once in a while that, Jim, I could buy close to a ton of gold coins in New York. I don't care. I really don't care. All that means is there's a fool willing to part with a ton of gold when he knows it's worth twice as much. The silver price is at least twice the advertised official price. When the gold trade note comes about and the dollar loses its official status as global currency reserve, you're going to have a tremendous amount of momentum in the quantum jumps for the gold and silver prices. I look forward to this. It's going to be exciting. I've mentioned the many steps before. You're going to see like a shutdown of the COMEX someday. It won't be the trigger. It'll be the result of the trigger. You're going to see the launch of the gold trade note. You can see a launch of the new Scheist dollar. You're going to see a move toward equilibrium. You're going to see open discussion of raising the gold price in order to reopen gold and silver mines because of acute shortages. You're going to see introduction of gold currencies. And this all means jumps to 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 and higher. You know, one of the biggest idiotic points made out there, and I've now seen the second one. First was from Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds. Idiotic financial essay about how the gold standard is not practical. And then by a Kitco editor named Ledbetter, another moronic essay about how the gold standard is not viable. Too much disruption. No, you get disruption after 4 decades of corruption. And after the corruption comes equilibrium and sound systems. One of the dumbest points that they tend to make in their idiotic excuses for financial expertise and essays is that there's not enough gold to cover all the money out there. What we've done was we've increased since 2001 somewhere between 8 and 10 times the money supply while we've suppressed the gold price. Well, it's an easy solution. You don't have too little gold to cover the cash, the currency in circulation, the currency in banking, even in electronic form. All you have to do is increase the gold price tenfold, and there's plenty of gold to cover all that increased, what they called monetary aggregate. In other words, money supply. I much prefer gold and silver. I think there are going to be some victims in fomented crypto crashes, but they're going to do well because they're real, they're viable, and they have a tremendous advantage of cross-border passage. This is tremendous. But when you think of cryptos, also think of blockchain technology. We're going to be moving toward a lot more usage of blockchain. For instance, property purchase contracts, patents, lists of new product descriptions and development. They're going to be passed across borders with the blockchain technology. It's going to be like a giant channel that's enforced through encryption. That's what blockchain is. It's not just for money movement. It's going to be for information movement also. Okay, let me make a comment since we're talking about gold and silver so specifically. I prefer 80% or more in silver versus gold. And if you want to dabble in platinum, fine, good luck. I don't have any great assurance that platinum is going to be a monetary metal. I do have very solid assurance that silver will be. When the gold trade note comes, when the dollar loses its global reserve currency status, when the gold currencies are hinted of and then announced, the gold and silver prices will rise, but the silver rise will be double to triple that of gold. And all you people out there who are lamenting the low price, the suppressed price, the lower value of your account, you know, you really need to wake up. This is a war, and you're talking about a suppressed price. And I don't really care much about suppressed prices, and you know, I feel sorry for you. I do indeed have sympathy if you're forced to unload some gold and silver at these artificially low and suppressed corrupt prices. It's unfortunate. But that's just, you know, you got to make it to the other side.
All right. Well, moving on here, I think we have time for about one last viewer's question. This viewer's question has to do with geopolitics, and it's one that we thought we'd end with. Do you see the U.S. moving towards détente in Syria now that the Iran-Qatar pipeline is actually more of a threat to the petrodollar?
I think we're very close to a situation where the U.S. government and its U.S. military admits defeat in Syria. It admits peaceful coexistence with the Gulf Arab nations who wish to work with Iran. I don't think it's going to transfer into any kind of détente in Ukraine, but I think it will become very clear that the U.S. says, Saudi, do whatever you wish, but, keep buying our weapons because we like that. The U.S. has a giant military center, command center, in Qatar. Qatar recently switched from the Saudi-supported gas pipeline to the Iranian-supported gas pipeline, while we have a military presence in that same country. If we engage in what we usually do, invade that nation, and what we usually do, unleash terrorists, that's what the U.S. does. It is our MO. If we do that in Qatar, we will invite a disaster. We will invite tremendous response against U.S. military installations across the world. We will invite attacks against the Qatar CENTCOM of U.S. military control, which doesn't control just, Gulf activity militarily, doesn't just control North African Arab military activity, but it controls the Afghanistan military activity, including drone strikes on civilian targets that might just happen to have that terrorist or other guerrilla included in the 20 people that they kill. I think the U.S. is moving very close to admission of Syrian détente and defeat, because not just the Russian military, but the Iranian military and soon Chinese peacekeeping troops in Syria will make sure that the U.S. gets its ass out. And furthermore, the Russians are making great progress all the time in exposing that the U.S. and Israel are ISIS, control ISIS, fund ISIS, arm ISIS, and conduct logistics for ISIS. A lot of the supposed Saudi and other Gulf Arab military deals are conduits for supplying ISIS. So we're going to see, I think, the U.S. would say peaceful coexistence with the Iran gas pipeline. They'll try to sabotage it later. Pardon me. I got really dry. Look at the progress the U.S. has made in Syria in destroying the nation and deterring foreign construction firms from building a pipeline in the country. I mean, you don't see like a list of 5 construction companies saying, well, we signed for Syrian work for a pipeline construction, but we're just waiting for the bombs to stop. No, there's no such thing. You watch some Russian construction come in there. They have lots and lots of experience with Gazprom pipelines. You watch the German construction firms come in. They got lots of experience with Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. So it's, the biggest conclusion I can come up with for the Qatar focus right now is it means the Saudi kingdom has turned rogue and is at great risk of failure. They're bankrupt. It's quite clear to me, and many Western analysts, not the majority, that the Saudis are at war with Yemen in order to steal their oil and gas reserves, because Saudis are lying about theirs, and their reserves are 80% less than what they claim. The Aramco IPO, this initial public offering, claims that Aramco's infrastructure for business, petrochemical, and their oil and gas deposits and reserves are valued at $2 trillion. And they're trying to sell 10% stake for $2 trillion. The Western financial analysts are rather adept and expert in this area, and they say Aramco is worth 5 times less. So, Saudi is desperate. They're trying to steal Yemen's energy deposits, and now it looks like they might try for a strong arm move to dominate, control, or steal Qatar's, because Qatar doesn't have much of any military self-protection. And the Saudis might be thinking that the U.S. military will force a coup there because we have such a big presence. 2 bases and the CENTCOM. I don't think that's going to happen. Qatar has very significant connections with Germany and Russia regarding LNG. The technology, the construction, the production, and the shipping. What it means to me, this whole Qatar situation, is that the breakdown of the Gulf Arab monarchies has moved into a second gear. The second gear toward the failure of some of them. Now, if you think that most of the Gulf Arab states get along, you're dead wrong. The Saudis and Qataris have been at odds ever since the Egyptian change of power. There's a cultural rivalry between the Saudis and Qataris. The Sheikha Musa, it's the woman, Sheikha, she's in charge in Qatar of educational movement, symphony music movement, and media movement. I'm sorry. Oh. Imagine that 80 times a day.
Are you right there?
I am now. There's been a rivalry between the Saudis and the Qataris that is not going to end for cultural leadership. And, this new Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, he was not next in line. He was the economics minister and the military leader. I don't know what they call defense minister. It's hardly defense, or committing war crimes. Is that defense? I don't think so. The Saudis are broke, and the Gulf Arab nations are not just bickering. They're really going at it. They've been going at it for quite some time, Elijah, over the good ISIS guerrilla groups versus the bad ISIS guerrilla groups. Most of them are under control of Langley and the Mossad of Israel. There are some little splinter groups, and who knows, maybe a few they can't control. And the U.S. is going to abandon the Kurds and have them slaughtered just like we always do. Harken back to Vietnam and the Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, M-O-N-G, the Hmong tribe in Cambodia that the U.S. military signed up for assistance in order to capture the Cambodian heroin trade. And after the war, they were all slaughtered because we abandoned them. Same thing's going to happen to the Kurds in Syria when we abandon them. It might be interesting to watch to see if the Russians protect them, because the bad guys in the room are wearing U.S. military uniforms and being protected by those wearing U.S. military uniforms. This Iran-Qatar pipeline, my last point, is also the Russian. It's Russian, Iran, Qatar gas pipeline. And what it does is it fills a void. Elijah, it fills the void from the U.S.-Saudi oil connection, otherwise known as the petrodollar. With the petrodollar dismantled, disintegrating, and erupting in front of your eyes, with the squabbling among the Gulf Arab monarchies, what you're seeing is a void being filled by a new natural gas cartel led by Russia, Iran, and Qatar. The U.S. cannot stop this, and it is going to be based in RMB currency payments, ruble currency payments, and even euro payments, because the Germans will not back down in connecting with Russia on their pipelines, their gas. Okay, so the Ukraine war, which is a U.S. government foreign policy initiative, resulted in the intensification of the Qatar connection moving toward Iran, and a defiance by Germany in linking with Russia. In other words, they marginalized Ukraine, while Gazprom decided to move full scale ahead through Turkey to connect to Southern Europe after the US-led failed coup against the Turkish leader Erdogan. I defy you, since 2001, to find a U.S. foreign policy initiative that is not turned to rubbish and rubble. The natural gas pipeline is going to be the backbone of the Eurasian trade zone, and it's going to fortify the non-dollar standard, and it's going to introduce the gold trade note. This new nat gas pipeline cartel is one of the most significant developments in the last generation. The Germans are going to be part of it. Eventually, you're going to be calling it the Iran, Russian, German, Qatar pipeline network. It's exciting. Iran will not back down. A lot of people don't understand. Iraq has a population of about 23 million. Well, we killed 3 million civilians, so it's down to about 20 million now. War crimes. Iran has about 75 to 80 million in their population. They're not just Tehran and a lot of little towns. No. There are a lot of cities in Iran, and they don't back down. The Iran sanctions was Obama's foreign policy blunder. The result was Iran worked with Turkey to supply them gold to be paid by India for Iranian oil and gas. So Iran developed the oil for gold trade in response to sanctions. Iran will not back down. They've joined forces with Russia and China in a very big way. A lot of exciting times here, Elijah, and you could point to any area on the map, and I can point out to you a U.S. foreign policy failure since 2001 and the inside job for the neocon fascist coup d'etat of the United States government. There's a failure even in South Korea, where under Chinese pressure, the South Koreans said, we no longer will follow through on our THAAD missile defense system, THAAD. One reason is not defensive, it's offensive. We got NATO defensive missiles surrounding the Russians on all their borders. They're not defensive, they're offensive. Very interesting times. I'm putting together final touches to the Iran-based gas cartel. An article on that pointing out its significance and inviting people to come to the Hattrick Letter, because I had a big section on that in the June issue that was published about 10 days ago. So thanks for having me on, Elijah. I apologize for the lousy voice, but I'm encouraged that, a few days ago I say 95% back to normal. Now I'm like 96. I'm inching toward it, and I've got one client who says my husband had this. Took him 6 weeks to overcome the bronchitis. It's very, very powerful. Well, I'm 5 weeks now, and we'll see what kind of shape I'm in after 6. But I got my energy, brain's working. I think this went reasonably well, and I thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. Did you want to quick share with the viewers where to find you online?
Okay, it's www.goldenjackass.com. It's been over 13 years now. It's quite a long trip. More like a trek, more like a voyage, an adventure. There are 2 monthly reports. The first is called the Global Money War Report. It's for high-level issues. It's really just a division of topics. The second report is called the Gold Currency Report. We've got a lot of details about the physical gold and silver markets, and it's where I put the Eurasian trade zone. It's where I put the petrodollar. All the commodity-based things are in the Golden Currency Report. Like oil is a type of currency, in a sense. But there's a free page in there where links for interviews like this are shown, made available, and public articles like the natural gas cartel that's going to come out, I hope, this weekend. And I invite people to go to the site and bounce around, look at the free stuff, sign up for the newsletter. I love mentioning my 2 favorite compliments. One was, I was a client of yours for a few years, but I thought I'd try some other newsletters since 2014. Now I come back and I wish I never left. And the other one was, I still get them. For the last 2 years, I've been just listening to your podcast and figured that was enough. But recently I signed up for your newsletter, and I wish I did long ago. So again, thanks for having me on. And I hope next time when I have an interview, it'll be a little easier with the voice. It's funny how I was sicker 3 weeks ago, but I had a better voice and the interview went better. But I couldn't concentrate so well. Now I can concentrate great. I got a lot of energy and, moving furniture, having my fun. But the voice it's like a reminder of where I've been. I'm doing what I can with, taking little elixirs with lemon. I've been doing honey all along. So, all right, well, thanks for having me on, and see you soon.
Great.